2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in Japan. In terms of the amount of radioactivity and health impacts, however, Chernobyl was a much bigger accident than the one that occurred in Fukushima. Chernobyl was also an entirely man-made event, whereas Fukushima was largely caused by natural disaster. It's ironic that the Chernobyl disaster occurred during what was supposed to be a routine safety test. This test was meant to figure out if the reactor could still provide enough energy to keep the cooling pumps running after the loss of power, and if they could be kept running until the emergency generator kicked in. Now, unless you're a nuclear engineer, the exact mechanisms of the action that led to the explosion can be difficult to grasp. They're explained in further detail in one of our episodes, What Caused the Catastrophic Nuclear Accident in Chernobyl. So we'll keep this short. Basically, catastrophe struck after a span of 1 hour and 24 minutes of preparing and conducting the test. A powerful steam explosion and fire released an abundance of hazardous material, spewing deadly radiation into the environment, resulting in a toxic cloud spreading across Europe and even stretching almost as far as to touch the United States and Japan. When the disaster at Chernobyl first struck, the Soviet Union made no immediate public announcement of it. Evacuations were urged in surrounding areas, but mostly maintained under secrecy in fear of international disgrace. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant was, after all, considered a triumph of Soviet science, a symbol of industrial and technological prowess. Thus, the nation's reputation was at risk following this massive failure. Attempts to keep the event quiet, however, were feeble. It was soon figured out that something was wrong when workers at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden found themselves setting off radiation alarms when arriving to work on the morning of April 28th. At first, they thought that maybe their monitor was on the fritz, the alarm being due to faulty equipment. But after further tests, they found that they were indeed covered in radiation from outside. A satellite also passed over Chernobyl, and the U.S. intelligence saw the image of the explosion, raising initial alarm that the Soviets had launched a nuclear missile. The source of the contamination was soon discovered along with the explosion, and the Soviet Union was forced to confess, publicly, admitting to the nuclear accident. So, who or what is to blame for the disaster? Some claim that the workers at the plant are at fault, while others believe that the accident was the result of a flawed design. At any rate, factors from a combination of both could have been responsible leading up to the event. The real blame, however, may be attributed to poor management. According to LifeScience.com, the accident resulted from incompetence and was made even worse by misinformation and secrecy. The safety test was originally supposed to be conducted during the daytime, when more senior engineers were on duty. This, however, would have meant shutting down the reactors and causing an interruption in electricity supply. Thus, the safety test was postponed, scheduled to occur during the night shift when electricity demands on the plant would be at their lowest. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, the engineers working the night shift consisted of a junior team on the scene. Though qualified, these workers were very young for such a complex environment. Just to give you an example of their age, the turbine operator was only 29 years old. It's said that the workers may have also been sleep deprived, since working the night shift can often be hard on your mind and your body. As cited in Psychology Today, it's not uncommon for night shift workers to develop psychiatric conditions due to accumulated sleep deprivation. As many of us know, fatigue can also often lead to mistakes. So it's possible that human error could have been at play with the combination of young workers performing the test into the late hours of the graveyard shift. This is not to say, however, that the blame should be placed squarely on their shoulders. They were just doing their job and doing it to the best of their ability while following orders. The way that the reactor core was designed also made it prone to heating very quickly, too quickly. It got hot, and it got hot at an alarming pace, too fast to handle. And despite there being many complications during the test preparations, the workers were ordered to go through with the test anyway. At 56 seconds before the blast, the 29-year-old turbine operator was ordered to proceed with shutting down the turbines to conduct the safety test. Energy levels then soared dangerously high, and that's when disaster ensued. So, now how could this nuclear disaster have been avoided? Well, let's first imagine a scenario with the safety test being conducted during the day as originally planned. There might have been a minor inconvenience with a temporary lapse of electricity. But hey, at least this is better than the alternative of having to uproot and evacuate thousands of people from their homes, right? So the senior engineering staff would have taken the lead on operations. We're assuming that they would have also been fresh on the day shift and alert. If anything went wrong, their many years of professional experience would kick in as they attempted to perform a balancing act with the levels of steam and heat in the reactor. But let's say, for argument's sake, that the reactor was just as unstable as it was when the junior engineers took the lead in the events of our timeline. How would the senior staff have handled it differently? Maybe they would have been better at balancing the levels in the reactor from getting too hot and exploding for now. Even so, that still didn't eliminate the problem if there was a data flaw in the design. Though the senior engineers might have managed to avoid disaster this time, an impending accident may have been bound to happen at some point in the future, waiting for someone, anyone, to make a mistake. Now, let's go back and imagine that the management is urging the senior staff to proceed with the safety test, despite complications. The engineers know full well that doing this would be dangerous because there have been problems with the reactor. So maybe compared to the junior staff, the seniors more adamantly protest going through with it. They put their foot down, and this is where the scenario could have deviated in one of two different ways. Management could have either responded by accepting the opinion of seasoned professional engineers while devising a different course of action, or they could be angered and continue to insist that the safety test proceed. In the former scenario, disaster may have been averted for the time being, but simply delayed, destined to take place eventually unless the issues with the reactor were addressed. In the latter scenario, an explosion would ensue just as it did with the junior engineers in our timeline. In essence, there are
Powering on.
of the team could have deviated, but
Mic
it's also
off.
possible that the disaster would have still happened.
Battery low.
The reactor was, after all, unstable. So unless this vital flaw was fixed in some parallel universe, Chernobyl could have probably been described as a bomb just waiting to go off at some point.
Charging battery.
Frighteningly, Russia has never moved on from the incident and still maintains the same technology. As of 2019, there are 11 RBMK reactors still operational in the country. In order to prevent another Chernobyl-like catastrophe, more workers may need to be trained in nuclear science. The problem is that it takes a lot of time to train people. It can take 2 to 7 years of graduate studies to become a fully trained radiation professional. Power plants also need a team of skilled and competent nuclear engineers, health physicists, reactor inspectors, risk managers, and communication specialists. Forming a team like this is not easy though, and it's highly expensive. There's also been a downward trend in the number of nuclear professionals or people entering the field. The NCRP anticipates severe shortages in these professions within the next 10 years, and thus there are not enough new emerging workers to replace the ones who will be retiring. These statistics are pretty scary if you think about it. Thus, the question of what could have prevented the Chernobyl disaster is an important one that could still apply for future accidents. In this case, learning from our past is essential. For those of you who are intrigued by Chernobyl's history and its danger, you can visit as a tourist, but we'd advise not sticking around for too long, since scientists estimate that the zone won't be habitable for another 20,000 years. Because of this, we don't imagine it would be too good for your health to stay for long, and who knows, you might just turn into a mutant. This is not plausible, of course, but we still wouldn't suggest entering the grounds without a guide, someone to detect radiation levels and check if it's safe to venture into certain areas. A 2012 horror movie called The Chernobyl Diaries plays out a fictional account of young travelers engaging in extreme tourism.
craziest scandal in League of Legends just got crazier. We've got thousands of dollars in fines, permabans from Riot esports events, allegations of verbal and physical abuse, allegations of forgery, and, of course, shady contracts. This story is getting wilder by the minute, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so buckle up. Alright, so in case you missed our last two videos about this, let's do a quick recap. Griffin is a League of Legends team in the LCK, Korea's pro league. They've had a little bit of a Cinderella run over the last few years where they started in Challenger and worked their way all the way up to Worlds this year, where they placed 5th, 8th. But right before Worlds, Griffin's coach, CV Max, abruptly left the team, which started an entire shitstorm. Two Griffin players said that CV Max was lying about Griffin on his stream. CV Max responded by saying that Cho, the manager of Griffin, banned him from streaming while he was on the team to prevent him from getting his name out there, and accused CV Max of just getting lucky and saying that he had nothing to do with Griffin's successes. On top of that, allegations began to surface that Cho may have strong-armed a player on Griffin, Kanavi, into signing an unfavorable contract. Still 8, Griffin's parent company, put out an apology and Cho resigned. But then Cho did an interview where he threw a bunch of allegations back onto CV Max. Then some senators got involved and Riot Korea began investigating. Alright, is that everything? That brings us to the present, where we have a ton of new developments in this story. I honestly can't pick which of these is the absolute craziest, so let's just run through them all chronologically. First, Riot Korea put out a competitive ruling on Griffin, and the beginning of it is that they've fined Griffin about $85,000 US. They've also indefinitely banned both Cho and CV Max from all Riot-sanctioned League of Legends events. Their careers in League are basically over. In a translation from Horizon's Kevin Kim, Riot writes that Cho behaved improperly during the whole situation with Kanavi. For a quick refresher, the whole issue with Kanavi was that he was forced by Griffin, allegedly, to sign a long-term contract in order to secure a higher transfer fee for the org when he was loaned to a Chinese team called JDG. Cho alleged that Kanavi participated in tampering, which Riot eventually said, no, he didn't. That is super complicated, but basically, Kanavi didn't fuck up. The problem is, Cho absolutely did. See, according to that translation, Riot found that Cho is guilty of strong-arming Kanavi into signing an unfavorable contract. Cho made Kanavi, a minor, process his own player transfer and pressured him unfairly, presumably in reference to getting a better transfer fee when he was loaned out to JDG. Riot also stated that Cho added a clause to Kanavi's contract that excluded his time on loan to JDG as part of the contract period, which that would effectively trap him on Griffin for way longer than he expected to when he signed the contract. Meanwhile, for CV Max, Riot wrote in their decision that they found evidence and instances of CV Max verbally and physically abusing players on Griffin. And personally, just as an aside, that seems like a pretty good reason to ban someone. If it's true, that is. Griffin is also being fined, as I already mentioned, but that's because Riot found that there were people in higher up positions in Griffin who either knew about the situation, didn't stop it, or otherwise helped Cho make it happen. They also wrote that if they find Griffin doing anything like this again, they could accrue further penalties, up to and including losing their spot in the LCK. That's some wild stuff, but it's really the tip of the iceberg. Korean Senator Tae Kyung-ha, who was looking into this whole situation, released a statement calling the whole thing abhorrent. Senator Ha said that Riot's decision to punish CV Max could be against the Korean law designed to protect whistleblowers. The law comes with up to 3 years of jail time for anybody who breaks it. The way that Senator Ha sees it, CV Max's courage to speak out against Griffin is admirable, and he shouldn't be punished for it. Notably, nothing in the statement mentioned anything about the allegations of verbal or physical abuse, just the allegations of corruption going on. Senator Ha also spoke in a separate article about what he found out when he looked into the situation regarding Kanavi's contract. Allegedly, according to some translations of an article published by Invent Korea, Griffin used a fraudulent contract to trick Kanavi. Unfortunately, I don't have a really solid translation of that article that I really trust right now, but I want to say that those allegations are extremely serious, because not only is Senator Ha alleging that Griffin broke the law, but also that they horribly mistreated a minor. Something that I want to note here that our translator told us is that Senator Ha is really famous for being a get shit done kind of guy. Our translator told us that while other politicians take a long time passing something or investigating something, Senator Ha has a long record of approaching difficult topics and not being afraid to blow things up. Anyway, within this, allegedly, Senator Ha is saying that Griffin forged legal documents, and honestly, that to me is the craziest part of this whole story. So I'm really sorry I can't go further into depth about it. I just need a better translation, and you can be sure that we're working on it, and we'll let you know more about that as soon as we understand it ourselves. Anyway, after Riot's announcement, CV Max took to Twitch and talked about a conversation he had with a Riot Korea employee. On his stream, CV Max alleged that the Riot employee said that CV Max told a player, quote, "do whatever the fuck pleases you," and that constitutes verbal abuse. Our translator specifically noted that instead of the word fuck, he really said, "do whatever your dick tells you to do," but it basically means the same thing once you translate it. CV Max goes on to allege that he never used that word, the one that's either dick or fuck, and says that Riot won't let him listen to the recordings they allege that they have of him verbally abusing players. Then, Still 8 made a statement on their website about literally everything up to this point. In it, they claim that Kanavi transferred to JDG of his own free will, that he was never threatened into signing the contract, that Griffin didn't do any document forging, and that Still 8 are going to be taking legal action against CV Max. And then, InVen published an article in which they interviewed several players who are on Griffin who alleged that they were verbally and physically abused by CV Max. In the interview, Griffin coach Chaos says that he saw CV Max throw his notebook and shake players by the collar. Sword, one of the players on Griffin, also says, quote, "he also said I'm disgusted and that he can't handle me. He said that if we lose because of me, he'd follow me to the end of the world to get revenge or that he'd kill me." Another player, Tarzan, says that he wasn't personally the victim of any physical or verbal abuse, but that he did witness CV Max insult other players, calling them assholes and saying they, quote, "fucking suck." Rather, another player alleges that CV Max pinched another player so hard it left a bruise. That player, by the way, was Cody. Rather also alleges that after a scrim 2 years ago, CV Max told one player, quote, "if I was a teammate in that game, I would have called you a bitch whose mom died." That's fucking crazy, and I don't even really know what that means. Anyway, there is a lot more to that interview, and I really recommend reading it if you want to know more about the whole situation. But the summary is, a lot of players and the coach of Griffin are backing up the allegations of verbal and physical abuse that Riot put out. Now, as a counterpoint, allegedly that bitch whose mom died insult was directed at Newt, who was Griffin's support player at the time. Newt has since gone on CV Max's stream to say that he was okay with being called that and he doesn't view it as verbal abuse. And to follow that out, some people have said that this kind of coaching style isn't all that unusual in Korea. Recently retired player Sang Yoon went on his stream and said that if this is a ban-worthy offense, pretty much every coach he's ever had would be banned. On top of that, former League of Legends pastor and personality Monte Cristo tweeted that he'd heard some very similar things about the Korean coaching style as well. Now, just because it's the style in the region doesn't really make it okay.
Camelot 331 here, and oh my god, oh my god, has the chunky poo slide hit the fan this time? And I don't know what to do. I don't even know what to say, or even how to approach this. I'm just filming stuff right now. I'm just randomly filming. So as you know, I've been covering stories that people send me from their workplaces, mainly GameStop, and basically just giving them a voice. Well, recently I shared one that was from a corporate associate directly from the corporate office. And ever since then, several people have reached out to me from the corporate office with absolutely insane info. Like, oh my god, it's worse than you think. And when we get to this last message, it's so insane what literally the CEO directly is talking about doing about my channel. So strap in, folks. But before we get started, make sure you give me an up doodle. It means a lot to me. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't. We're still behind GameStop, just barely. Just barely. So let's pass them. So let's get into this beautiful, beautiful, terrifying ass tea. Hey Cam, I work at the corporate office at GameStop. Things are heating up here. Damn, we're off to a fiery ass start. What do you mean, my man? I said back.
I got there too late. The ad was too long. Holy moly.
some board, good board of that was close too. Holy shit, that was close. There are some board, good board of Shadow Freeze were fucking Shadow Freeze were insane. I was actually thinking about playing one because I was like, he wasn't even able to ready for all the skills, like right until the very end. Like Rogue with like full blood thing, like that's what was so cool is you have to raid to get this gear. Like I like that. I thought that was good. Like I know some people are like, well that's dumb or whatever. No, I thought it was fucking amazing. His career was really hard. He was really overpowered. So like him winning those duels actually really big. Swifty's watching. Go Swifty!
Yo, what's up? It's funny how his viewers come to me to say,
This is my winter spring? Yeah. I fucking hated this druid, dude. See, this is like. See this? This is why I fucking hate dueling druids, man. This is the worst. And they just kite you and they run away and they heal themselves and they run away again and they heal themselves again. It is Look at this motherfucker, dude. He just kites make you fear him, dude. There it is. And then they go into bear form and they just slowly heal up with their odds. So like, actually beating a druid is super fucking hard. I wonder how these guys would compare to like current vanilla players. I'm actually curious. Yeah, dire bear form. Because you used to have bear form and then you would upgrade it to dire bear form. Yeah, at level 40 I think you would upgrade it. Yeah, it was insane. Because you get like more armor and everything. One mistake is all it takes. That's crazy. Like his gun would hit for that much damage. And he just full heals anyway. This is why fighting druids is so fucking annoying, man. Because they can just full heal. I mean, to be fair, he's full tier 2 with yeah, they're going down. Oh, this is you, dude. No! I'm gonna be that guy! I'm gonna be that guy! That's you. See, I don't know how he beat this tower. Whenever I saw this, he disarmed him right off the bat. Yeah, full tier 2 was Sulfuras. Like, Sulfuras it's a red weapon. Like, red paladins should get Sulfuras first. Warriors is what represent that he feared him. But see, I want to show you guys this right here. Pause, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Frog for the win. Brizzy is it as he feared him, the proc for Sulfuras applied to Swifty, which gave him the debuff, where he was taking extra damage, and that way it interrupted his bandage. So this guy actually got extremely lucky in the pool against Swifty. See that? Yeah, that's the breakdown.
yeah, I'm hyped for Classic, of course, dude.
Yeah. Right. I thought there was a weapon chain. And I haven't thought about that in years. So he's running away. He's trying to wait for the bubble to go off so he can charge back in. He's going for the second holy light. Obviously missed the interrupt there. Interrupts run GCD back then too. A lot of people don't remember that. It was a bad time. I never actually really thought that was bad. So if you upgrade everyone now? I mean, like, the Paladin still should win in this situation, I think. Because, like, his gear was good, right? He had some tier 2.5. But, like, the other guy has a legendary weapon. Like, how are you going to say it's just a super gear? Like, it was right down to the fucking wire, too. Like, he had the auto attack because he didn't even have any damage. That was the closest to it. Yeah. Level 60. I feel like hunters, like, there's no way that you're gonna lose to a hunter. At least, like, I don't really see it happening. If you get the charge off at the beginning. See, that guy made a mistake by letting his bear charge in there. Stupid. By the way, do you know how hard it would be to get the name Purple on 80 Road right now?
How do
Stupid. By the way, do you know how hard it would be to get the name Purple on 80 Road right now?
how hard would it be to get the name Purple?
It still beats the back. Right there. He did scatter shot. They don't even have scatter shot anymore, do they? Nope.
Wow.
Yeah, they took that out of the game. Yeah, that guy should. Yeah, as soon as he shipped him over this one. The center was too rough.
That's what gold.
Vision's post was the reason I made the video. Here, yo, check this out. Check this out. Chad doesn't even know. Chad doesn't know. This right here. Oh my god. Beating a mage in a